Welcome back, guys, to another video. And without a doubt, whenever you're talking to a fan of JRPGs, there's always a series that gets a name drop, and that is Final Fantasy. And why not? It's like the Star Wars of JRPGs. And while everyone has a favorite in the series, I feel like one game really doesn't get enough recognition. It's like the sibling no one talks about, and that is Final Fantasy V. And when I get to doing these videos, I get to kind of gush about it. I get to kind of tell you guys why I love this game so much and why I think it's such an important entry to the series. Final Fantasy V was originally released for the Super Famicom, and this was another Final Fantasy that Westerners never had a chance to play for the longest time. And one of the reasons why is because Squaresoft didn't see the expectations they expected from Final Fantasy II on the Super Nintendo, also known as Final Fantasy IV. So instead of us getting Final Fantasy V, we got a spin-off, more simplified JRPG called Final Fantasy Mystic Quest. Think of like Super Mario Bros. 2, Lost Levels, and Doki Doki Panic, and you kind of get the idea. So it wasn't until 1999 that we got Final Fantasy Anthology. It was a compilation disc of Final Fantasy VI, also known as Final Fantasy III, with better translation and CGI cutscenes, and the never before played Final Fantasy V. And that's when I first played Final Fantasy V. And I was just getting off this big gaming high. I had finished Final Fantasy VIII, I had played Final Fantasy VII, and I knew Final Fantasy IX was right around the corner, and I wanted to play more Final Fantasy. So I was really excited to give this game a try. The first thing I noticed when I played Final Fantasy V was the color palette. The color palette is so much more vibrant, it's so much more colorful compared to Final Fantasy IV. I feel like it's a little bit more pastel-y. I feel like the greens and the blues really pop out. We actually saw sprite animation for the facial expressions. You know, before then, we would see sprites, kind of shake their heads or nod or make a little hand gesture. But this one, we actually saw their faces change, their eyes would bulge out of their head, and it kind of gave the game a little bit more lightheartedness and a little bit more comedic styles. Now, Final Fantasy V, the story to this game follows a lot of the homage of Final Fantasy as a whole, the essence of Final Fantasy, the original Final Fantasy, and that is the Warriors of Light, saving the world from the Shrouds of Darkness. And one thing different from Final Fantasy V to the original Final Fantasy is we actually saw the crystal shatter. We saw the world become shrouded in darkness and awaken the evil mage X-Death, who was originally slain by the Warriors of Dawn. And the game starts off with our hero Bartz, who sees a meteorite crash and goes to investigate. He's a young adventurer with his faithful companion Boko, a little chocobo. And while they go and investigate, they encounter an old man named Galoff, who has amnesia, who can only remember two things. He can remember his name and the fact he needs to get to the Wind Shrine. And of course, after that, we meet Liana, who is a princess who is in search of her father, the king of Typhoon. And it really starts getting kind of interesting there, because then they sneak on a pirate ship because the Wind Shrine is starting to shatter and they really want to set sail. So they actually sneak on a pirate ship and they run into Ferris, a pirate, and it becomes like this buffet of personalities and these strangers who come together in almost a weird twist of fate to save the world. And I really love that. I really thought that it kind of drew you more into the game compared to more previous entries, and I really enjoyed that. And man, when I talk about Final Fantasy V, I have to talk about the battle system, and I think this is one of the reasons why this is such an important game to the series, because Final Fantasy V borrowed some entries to Final Fantasy III on the Famicom of the job system, but they took it to a whole new level. In Final Fantasy III, you could pick your jobs. You could have a character be a black mage, you can have them be a knight, a monk, what have you, and that's what they would stay as. Where in Final Fantasy V, you could take experience from that job called ABP, which was separate from experience points of your usual character to level up. You would actually level up those jobs. So you could take, say, a black mage, and you can take elements of, say, a monk and mix it together and have like a badass black mage who's great at hand-to-hand combat. And this was very important because we would see this in other Final Fantasies, more importantly Final Fantasy X2, Final Fantasy Tactics, that whole series, and of course Final Fantasy XI. It was really something else, and I really enjoyed this game. And what I really love about it is the fact that it's not a hard game to come by, because after it released on PlayStation, it's on so many other consoles as well. You can get it on the iOS, you can get it on Android, you can get it on Steam, you can also get it on PSN, Wii Virtual Console. I'm telling you guys, if you're a huge JRPG enthusiast and you haven't given this game a try, definitely check it out. You will not be disappointed. I definitely wasn't. It's actually one of the, let me show you guys over here. I actually have one Super Famicom game in my collection, and that is Final Fantasy V. And I bought this at a flea market a couple of years ago, and what was really interesting about it was it had actual Japanese writing on it. Like, you know, they write their names on cartridges just like over here, and that was really cool. And I modded my Super Nintendo so I could play it. And man, this is such a great game. I cannot stress enough. You guys definitely need to check out Final Fantasy V. But anyway, guys, if you've played Final Fantasy V, be sure to leave a comment below. Tell me some of your favorite moments in the game. I'd love to hear from you. And also, what is your favorite Final Fantasy? I'd love to hear that as well. As always, guys, thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, and as always, happy gaming.
Can't get enough of Excess Gaming Podcast? Be sure to check out our audio podcast on Podomag.com. You can also subscribe to us on iTunes. And if you have a YouTube channel or podcast you'd like to share, be sure to check us out on Facebook on our group page and join the community. As always, guys, thank you so much for all the support, and happy gaming.